Good afternoon and welcome to 15 Minutes in the Forest. I'm Neil Clark, Extension Forester for Eastern Virginia. Today we're going to be talking about American beech, Fagus grandifolia. It's a great species that is all over Virginia. You hear about it and read about it more in the northeastern United States. You do see it more in the cooler climates. Particularly the thing that sets it apart, however, is the fact that it is long-lived and it is definitely suited for those environments that are less disturbed. My theme of this video is the beech is a survivor and not a thriver, and I'll explain that more later. But to start with the name, Fagus is derived from the Greek word phasian, which means to eat, and that is due to the edible mast, the edible seeds of the beech nut that it makes. And the other characteristic of beech is its smooth bark. And that is obviously one of the indicators of beech when you see where folks have unscrupulously carved their name or initials in the bark. It will be there long-lived. And that goes back to even the ancient Romans. The bark carving tradition is very old. The Roman poet Ovid composed a fictional letter where it is written, "The beeches still preserve my name carved by your hand. In Anoni, the work of your pruning knife is read upon their bark, and as the trunks increase, the letters still dilate." So that was written not about the American beech, but about beech trees near Rome, obviously 2,000 years ago. So it's one of the few trees, though, that does maintain smooth bark most as it matures. Most trees, as they mature, the bark characteristics become quite a bit rougher. So this is the only tree in the genus Fagus that's in North America. You'll find it mostly in eastern North America these days, though the pollen records indicate that prior to the glaciation period, it could be found all the way across into California. Glaciation came and somehow retreated the beech back to the eastern portion of the United States. You can easily see these buds that are long, about 3/4 of an inch long, and very slim, cylindrical, and very pointy. Some people say cigar shaped. And then here, of course, is a leaf. You can see this is the skeleton of a leaf from last year, and you can see how thin these leaves are. One of the thinner leaves that we have, and that leads to the persistence of this plant. You can find some summertime leaves. Show you the stomata. So these trees have a very low respiration rate, and those stomata on the leaves open and close in a hurry. So that is what gives this tree the ability to survive and be persistent in the understory. Beech is a component in 3 of the major forest types defined by the Society of American Foresters, and it is also a component of 17 other forest types, which leads us to the portions of like I said, Southeast Virginia, where you'll find it largely is down in the less accessible areas, and it is not a very wet tolerant species, which is interesting. Again, we find it near water on super well drained slopes, but it does not grow in water very well. The seeds easily will decay in water environments, and some data from Kentucky indicated that that larger trees that were submerged, where the roots were submerged for 14 days, died. So it is not tolerant to being submerged full time in a water environment. But there again, we do see them near main species near riparian areas in eastern Virginia. This tree right here is actually very uncommon. This is a very sound stem for being this large. Usually at this point, something has introduced some decay. Usually you'll see pockets of voids in the bottom. So I suspect this tree may be one of the few that are solid. So why do I say beech trees are survivors and not thrivers? For one, in the tree world, thrivers have to grow very rapidly. In the space of an opening in the forest, typically those trees that race to the top are the ones that are successful. So the faster growing trees are what we call early successional species that need open sunlight. This, obviously, I said, is a very tolerant tree, so it's the reverse. It grows very slow, but it can also grow in limited sunlight, which means in most of Virginia, which has been largely harvested and disturbed for the last 400 years, those areas that are disturbed the most, other trees tend to outcompete the beech. However, in areas that are less disturbed, the beech, slow and steady, lingers in the understory, where it will eventually have its day and make its way to the top. Part of that also is maximum height. For most beech, about 80 feet may be the maximum height. Whereas most of your oaks and hickories, the other dominant types in the state, usually easily exceed 110 feet. So height-wise, the beech is not going to go there. And also, and it does tend to sprout very profusely, which gives it an advantage. And it also can sucker from the roots. Defines the term in some people's mind of beech brush. So there's some areas where there's a lot of suckers in the understory. This same characteristic is what gives it adventitious branching. It does not self-prune very well. Because it is tolerant, it is covered from top to bottom with many small branches. So they're slow growing. They don't grow very big, but they hang in there. So a lot of 1-inch branches from the stump to the top of a American beech tree. However, if something comes down and breaks that branch off, then that forms a place where decay can enter, and it's been documented that well over 70 species of decay pathogens can infect a beech tree, which is another factor which creates their hollow characteristics, or that they do have lots of voids along the stem, and usually the entire stem can be hollowed in many places. But also back to their persistence. So even though they have this fungus, they're not going to let it kill them. They'll keep growing branches and foliage and slow growing. But what that allows historically is some of these hollow logs were used for culverts, and which is not great for wood products, but is super important and valuable for wildlife habitat, which is another reason these are great along the riparian corridors. But a hollow bole like this would be a great den tree for bear and larger mammals that need dens in areas where there's not rock. And then higher up in the stem, those voids do become great nesting areas for a variety of birds and small mammals. The triangular nuts are suitable for eating, which is why I mentioned the species name comes from the Greek phasian. And in fact, some towns that were under siege during those times actually survived off of the mast from beech trees. Again, probably not the American beech, but from a very similar cousin. To point that out, Pliny the Elder writes, referring to them as one of 13 varieties of acorn, he writes, "The beech is the sweetest of all, so much so that, according to Cornelius Alexander, the people of the city of Chios, when besieged, supported themselves wholly on mast. The different varieties cannot possibly be distinguished by their respective names, which vary according to their several localities. The acorn of the beech is similar in appearance to a kernel enclosed in a shell of triangular shape. The leaves are also very fattening for dormice and good for thrushes too. Both Roman delicacies, but outside of the scope of this article. Almost all trees bear an average crop, but once in 2 years. This is the case with the beech more particularly." And on that note, I'm trying to imagine, when you see how small these nuts are, how whole cities of people survived on the mast from these trees. Of course, these trees would only make that mast certain times of year, so my assumption is that the people must have intentionally harvested that mast during that time, and probably had a process for separating out the nuts from the burrs, and stored those seed and used them for other purposes. Now when we look at that seed, you'd have to collect so many of them to make any part of your diet. It seems a little intractable, but nonetheless, they were used. When you got to get by, you find a way, right? So these seeds, again, very small, definitely do not disperse well. They are triangular, so they don't roll, and not sure how well they may float on their own. Animals, obviously, if they got them, not sure they're going to take time to bury those as they would with a protected acorn or hickory nut. And blue jays have been recorded that they will move these seed around as they do acorns and other seed. The wood is not the strongest, but it is used for furniture and flooring and things of the such. The great characteristics, it's a pretty wood. It has a nice color, and when quarter sawn, has flecks that you can see that give it a good characteristic. It is dense, so it is used for firewood and fuel wood. Beech is monoecious, which means both male and female flowers occur on the same tree. The buds come out in spring and start to produce a good quantity of seed at 40 years, and large quantities of seed when the tree reaches 60 or so years old. So those seeds tend to mature and drop from September to November. Usually the earliest ones to drop are usually infected or wormy. They have an insect or disease issue that caused them to drop early. So if you're collecting seeds, get the ones later in the season that drop tend to be your better bet. These seeds, when they hit the ground, do germinate well in mineral soil or leaf litter, but as mentioned, in a super moist, wet environment, will not last long in the presence of decaying organisms. Make sure you join us at 12:15 on April 1st, where Karen Snape will share with us the basics of tree ID. And that's no April Fool's joke.